you so much for joining us tonight for a discussion on the final film of Palm Desert's public art documentary film series in partnership with UCR Palm Desert Center. Hopefully you had a chance to watch The Lost Surrealist about the life of Leonora Carrington. If not, there will be time after. During the discussion, we ask that you place questions in the Q&A box and we will read them as we work through. At this time, I'd like to introduce Deborah Schwartz-Glickman. She has been employed by the City of Palm Desert since 2003. She spent the first 16 years of her career with the city running its public art program. And in October of 2018, Ms. Glickman transferred to the Economic Development Department, where she is currently serving as the business advocate. Ms. Glickman was raised in Santa Monica and holds a BA from Boston University and an MA from Case Western Reserve University, both in art history. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ms. Glickman.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back with the film series. It's kind of hard not to see everyone's faces out there, but I'm sure there's some familiar ones. So thank you all for being here tonight. And I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this conversation with Melanie Cameron. Melanie is the director of Gallery Wendy Norris in San Francisco. This is one of the great things about Zoom. We can tap into people all over, and it's nice to have her with us via Zoom. She focuses on modern art artists represented by the gallery. She has nearly 15 years of experience working primarily with, I like that her bio says primarily with, and it's such a robust group. Private collectors, museums, institutions, scholars, and curators in regards to acquisitions, exhibitions, publications, and research of modern artists. Starting her career as a practicing attorney, which is just great, she segued into the art world with a previous gallery where she was an art consultant, chief researcher, and co-curator with a collection also specializing in Surrealism. So I can't think of a better speaker today. She works directly with Leonora Carrington's work. So welcome, Melanie. It's really great to see you. It was great to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you to everybody for having me. So nice of you to invite me.
So we're just going to engage in a little conversation. I have some questions, and then as Amy mentioned, there is a Q&A, and I'm going to try and keep an eye on that. I will probably fail at keeping an eye on that, so I think Amy is going to send me a little reminder if I've missed some questions. But I'm going to start out with a couple questions of my own.
Please.
Can you tell us a little bit about Gallery Wendy Norris and how it came to carry Leonora Carrington's work?
Yes, absolutely. The gallery's been around since about 2002. And we represent, our global headquarters is in San Francisco. We represent both modern and contemporary artists. And what we do now is we mount exhibitions both domestically and internationally, depending on where we think the audience is going to be best for our artists. I specialize in the modern side of the gallery. So those artists include Leonora Carrington, Remedios Varo, Dorothea Tanning, Wolfgang Pollen, and now Alice Rahone, who we've added. And it's such a pleasure. It's an honor to work with these artists' works. And Leonora in particular, though, I had to have Wendy tell me the story of her meeting, and it's as great as I wanted it to be. She actually met her through two scholars, Susan Aberth, who is a professor at Bard, and she specializes in Latin American art and also Surrealism, and then Whitney Chadwick, who she is San Francisco-based scholar. And she is, I mean, along with Susan, the sort of guru of the women artists and the Surrealist movement, focusing on gender as well. And so both of those women actually gave Wendy, Leonora's about 17 years ago, gave her Leonora's her cell phone number. And so Wendy called Leonora up on her cell phone, and she said, you know, I'd like to visit Mexico City, and I'm interested in your work. And so Wendy went down there, and I think at the time, again, this was about 17 years ago, you know, Wendy didn't really have a sense of the importance and sort of the grand reputation of Carrington, which actually might have been to her benefit, you know, in going to meet her on this first meeting. And I think actually Leonora sort of liked that about her, because, you know, Wendy saw all these people sort of fawning over her, and she didn't act that way with her. You know, it was much more natural. But, you know, as Wendy describes it, she was, when she went down there, she was actually pregnant with her first child, and noticeably so. You could actually tell that she was. And so, you know, she visited Leonora, and Leonora was, you know, she had her over to the house, and she, you know, Leonora's smoking, and Cheeky was there, her husband, who was still alive at the time. And, you know, they sat down at the kitchen table, and their first conversation was, Leonora wanted to ask her what she thought about overpopulation. and, and it was sort of Leonora's, you know, Wendy said it was sort of Leonora's way. I mean, she just had this, it was her trying to be funny. I mean, she had this very acerbic wit, but the fact that Wendy sort of took that conversation head on and just went right into it, Leonora really enjoyed that. She didn't really even hesitate. She just jumped right in. And I think she spent about at that first visit, about 2 days with Leonora, sort of going back and forth, again, visiting other people, but coming back. And they talked about art. And I think Wendy had told her that she purchased, you know, 3 or 4 of her works. And Wendy had a painting called A Warning for Mother. And in that composition, while she's sitting in Leonora's kitchen, she could recognize the stove that was sort of depicted in this painting too. So, and I love the title of that painting. But again, she wasn't, you know, it just sort of happened naturally after that. They became friends. And so they talked every, you know, few months, and talked on the phone. They saw each other every few months. And she says Leonora taught her how to drink tequila. And you know,
That's a noble trait.
I know. It was just, yeah. And then, you know, for her first show that she had of Leonora, she wanted Leonora to come. And Leonora was afraid of flying. She didn't want to fly. And so it came to pass that Wendy's partner said he would go down to get Leonora, and they'd come by boat. So they'd settled on that. And then Leonora canceled because she said she just didn't feel strong enough to make the trip. It was going to be a long trip.
Do you know how old she was right about that time?
Would have been in her 2008. So let's
Oh,
see,
so
the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she said
Yeah.
she passed in 2011. So
Exactly.
that's what I read. Yeah. So
And
I don't blame her.
yeah. And so Wendy said, okay, so I'll come down there, and we'll do a press conference, you know, 2 days. They had a press conference down there. And, you know, Wendy said, she goes, I was not prepared because Leonora typically didn't speak with the press. And she goes, and they were just booked with, you know, interviews in Spanish, interviews in English. Everybody wanted to talk with her and to have this interaction with her. And as Wendy said, she says, you know, Leonora had 2 rules if she was going to do it. Wendy had to talk about the art, because Leonora did not like to talk about her artwork. It was very interesting.
The film touches on that.
Exactly. Wendy had to talk about the art. And if anyone asks questions about Max Ernst, I will get up and walk out. So those are her 2 stipulations. And yeah. So that was sort of the beginning and the first sort of showing of her work and what that entailed.
That's really an interesting story. And it sounds like Wendy started out almost as a collector, and then, you know, really, really saw the value, and the work is beautiful. One of the questions I had when watching the film, though, is they don't contextualize the artwork in terms of size. What's the scale of her work? Is it a smaller, intimate, or is it a larger experience?
It's, you know, it varies.
Or all of the above.
Exactly. I was going to say it's typically small to medium, I would say. Now she did do, she was asked in 1963 to do a mural, El Mundo Mágico de los Mayas, the magic world of the Mayans. And it's at the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. So that is a grand mural that she did. Yeah. It's extraordinary. And then we recently placed one of her largest canvases with the collector, and it was about 79 by 70. It was extraordinary, because usually when you see a large painting, oftentimes it'll lose the intricacies or the delicate details. This was as delicate as a small painting on this enormous canvas. It was really extraordinary. But those are atypical. I would say they're mostly smaller to medium.
Do you have any concept, and this isn't a question I threw at you in advance, so I'm not sure, but of how long it would take her to do a small piece or a large piece, or did she work on multiple canvases at once, or was it kind of one piece at a time?
You know what? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure how long, and how many that she worked on. I think I've seen pictures of studios where it looks like maybe, there's usually one very focused on her easel. So I'm not sure about that. No, I don't know. I know she did use egg tempera in like her 1940s paintings. And I imagine that was, I mean, it seems like it'd be a very intricate sort of process, involving the egg and the mixing of the pigment and things like that. So very in depth, but how long they would take, I'm not sure.
And quick drying, I think the egg tempera is. So, I mean, it is something where you probably couldn't be working on too many. Either you're going to work on all of them with the same color at once, or you're going to really concentrate on one. Um, I, I thought that was a really nice nod in the film to see her mixing her pigments and not explaining it, but really a nod to her style and the how much of herself goes into the work, the personal touch to that, not buying the, I'm sure she bought some pre-made paints, but making her own pigments, I thought was really interesting.
Very much so. Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
harkens back to the egg again was very much related to, I think, just in alchemy and the egg being such an important symbol within alchemy, and then working that
Mhm.
into her actual, creations.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me between the film and what you were talking about with the press conference is in the film, it's very unclear to me how well known she was in Mexico during her life. There's a curator speaking that says she was a national treasure. We take her as our
Yeah.
own. But and there's a reference to her not liking to do interviews, but not a lot of conversation about how many interviews are being asked for. Is she really well known? Was she selling in her time? Clearly, she was selling some because she was supporting her family. But do you have any insight into sort of what her world was at that time?
So let's see. She was very it was interesting. She was very treasured in Mexico. And that's Teresa Arc, that curator, is actually a good friend of ours too, and we work with her. And
Nice.
so she had, yes, and so what she says, I believe, is very true. I mean, she they very much, she adopted it as her country, and they very much,
Mhm.
adopted her as well too. So I think that her sculptures, or so again, you have that mural that's in the museum. Her sculptures are actually throughout like the public squares or throughout the city there in Mexico.
Okay, so she was pretty active.
She was known there. I would say in the United States, she showed here for sure. She was the first woman to have a show at the Pierre Matisse Gallery in New York in the 1940s, which is a very big deal. And she did show, continuously through New York. But I think what really, exposed her name and her artwork in the United States was much more recent. I would say in 2012, the catalyst was really a show that LACMA had called In Wonderland,
Okay.
and it was extraordinary. I think they even say that it was one of their most attended exhibitions.
Really?
Yes, and it was a group female surrealism show. So it was these women artists who had been involved in surrealism, and it was almost just like that kind of exposure. Ever since then, we've noticed that we're helping to curate more shows, the loans, the literature, the scholarly input. It's growing.
Mhm.
So, but it really started with that In Wonderland, and then it's just been going since then. But I think in Mexico, I remember somebody saying that even her exhibition in 2018 at the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City, the attendance was even greater than Frida Kahlo's.
Oh, wow. So
Yes,
she, yeah,
very, very
yeah.
beloved there. Yeah.
That's lovely. That's just
No,
lovely.
I
So
know.
the LACMA exhibition you just described was leads me to one of my other questions, which is how does she fit into the female surrealist of her time? It's the film is interesting that it almost, for lack of a better term, describes the women as adornments or jewelry for the gentlemen, except for she did not fit that category. How does she fit in with other female surrealists of the time?
I I would say they were each so distinct. And you're right, they sort of they rebelled against that, like the term that they use in the film, which is the femme enfant, the female
I
child.
thought that was a very telling statement.
It's a femme enfant, and you can just tell that, they tried to apply that to them, and they weren't having it,
Mhm.
because they were so singular and strong in, I think, each of their individual artistry. But for Leonora, I would say what was unique about her, what she brought, what was her own form of surrealism, was There were two things I think that were really, it was autobiographical. So it was very much about
Mhm.
her and her life experiences. But if you'll notice in her work, it's not typically a very literal depiction of her. It's, she disguises herself almost. So she'll almost use like these surrogates or these avatars and these little characters to sort of depict, either life events or her life there in Mexico or her life in the UK, what she's experienced. So I think that's interesting in that she uses her art to tell her story, but yet there is a part of her that's still veiled within it. Um,
Mhm.
and then there is, I think she just did this in a remarkable way. She took the sort of traditional domestic setting and what would be considered like an everyday, at the time, typical
Mhm.
feminine role of, being a mother, cooking and these, and she elevated it to this almost magical level. So she created sort of like this magical realm within this almost realm of domesticity. She sort of found things in that where she, the ordinary could be extraordinary and you could depict one with the other. So I think
Mhm.
she just did that beautifully.
I think it's so interesting how, and it's not atypical with artists, but how she really didn't want to talk about her work and really felt that something that is so internal to her and her dreams or what's on the canvas. So you would think that you may want to explain a little, you know, but that it
Yes.
really was about being up to the viewer and the importance of just expressing herself, but not necessarily having people understand it in the way that she would like to curate.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I know it would be nice if we could have, sort of, she talked about her, inspirations and things like that. And
Mhm.
I think they become very clear too, the Irish folklore of her that she was told by her nannies and her grandmother and mother, and how, she was told by them they were, descended from the little people and the fairies of the Irish folklore and things like that. And that you see come out, I think that always was with her, as was, I think, when she moved to Mexico and she started experiencing the cultures there and the traditions there and the artwork there. But you're right. She didn't like to sort of verbally pontificate on it.
I also know from working with artists for so many years that a lot of them will just tell you whatever they feel like telling you at the moment about the work. And then the next person asks, and it's a totally different story. So sometimes it's better off. Or, or artists, they'll come up with a title 1 minute and say, why did you title that? Well, that's the title you picked 5 minutes ago.
I
So,
Yes.
so yeah, I mean, sometimes it works in mysterious ways. Um,
Definitely.
so
Uh,
one of the things that I find most interesting about art is an artist is how their work changes when their environment changes. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about how her work evolved as she moved from place to place. And then also in the film, they talk about her children being a huge influence on her work. But
yes.
I find it hard to believe that, she's not here to hear this, but with Max Ernst, that must have influenced her work and hanging around that group. And as she moved through, do you have some insight to how her work evolved as she grew and as she relocated and had children?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that there was a common element from the very beginning that always stayed with her, and I think it evolved depending on her and from her environment, her life experiences, time. There was always the fantastical imagery, the female figures, the animal creatures, things like that. Again, growing up with the stories of the Irish folklore, that was very influential on her. And then her love of horses, that started when she was younger as well too. She'd ride with her mother, you know um and also the literature references she had in her nursery. She would have Beatrix Potter and Lewis Carroll, Jonathan
Mhm.
Swift, the Gothic tales. So I think, that's also, she was she and then when she moved to Mexico, I think she carried those with her, and then they matured and they sort of evolved too with her new home, because there she was very welcomed there. I mean, it was an expat group because many artists during World War II, like her, went
Mhm.
into exile there into Mexico, and so she really was surrounded by people in her same position there, and they were very welcoming of each other. That's where she and the artist Remedios Varo who was also in exile. She was from Spain, and they became very close, which was just a wonderful friendship for her there. So I think, the two of them started to explore things together. So they were started to explore cooking, but then they'd also sort of make the kitchen into like this pseudo-scientific laboratory. And so, and then they would establish, sort of associations between like the women's traditional roles and sort of like these, magical acts or rituals or things. And she became very interested when she was there in Mexico in alchemy and magic, and which were sort of part of life there in Mexico.
It
So,
makes a lot of sense.
exactly. So she would
Mhm.
see like, there'd be herb salesmen, that would have like these seeds and insects and candles and things, but they were for ancient ceremonies or shamanistic practices and things like that. And so she and Varro became very, enthralled with that too. And again, I think the cultures she experienced there too, you can see it in her compositions. You can see how, the pre-Columbian imagery that, in Mexico, and how that affected her, and that translates into her work, that, the Aztec, the Mayan cultures as well. You even actually see like Egyptian archaeology, things she was studying, Mexican
Mhm.
anthropology. So I think that, being in that new home, having all of these, I mean, continuously absorbing these different topics, but also just from even her surroundings too. It was there, I think she started studying Tibetan Buddhism and the teachings of Gurdjieff, which were about, human consciousness and the evolution of human consciousness, things like that. These were all in her new home too. And I think they influenced her work, and she explored them in her work too. So it was very interesting because, these in Mexico, these she was raised Catholic, and in Mexico, it was the sort of the indigenous beliefs were very much sort of melded with also the Catholic faith there too. So I think you see that come in her work as well too, sort of like these
Interesting.
ceremonial scenes, these rituals, and things like that. So it's very much like a melding. It's so fascinating to me from all these different places that she took and traveled and became part of her.
It's such an interesting background. I mean, the riding horses with her mother is very British aristocratic, and then
Very.
moving through to the rebels of the Surrealist, and then into Mexico, which is just such a different culture. It's just such an interesting evolution uh, of of a human being, and then having that reflected in the work that she creates that lives on for all of us to see in documentaries and otherwise is pretty amazing.
Yes, absolutely. I think so too. I just loved that film because, I didn't meet her and I don't get to talk with her. So to hear her voice, or to hear her sons talk about, I think Gabby says at one point, he says, she never felt like she belonged of any place in particular, which I
Mhm.
thought was interesting because they all became a part of what she expressed in her work. Even maybe if one didn't ever feel entirely her home, they all became a part of her, it seemed like. At least that's how it gets expressed in her work.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I did see we have a question in the Q&A, and thank you for the question asker. And that is there any book on her life that you can recommend?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Apparently, I can't read and talk at the same time. Sorry, that came out a little staccato. They're looking for a book recommendation.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I mean, fantastic book is Susan Aberth, and so that's Leonora Carrington, Art and Alchemy, I believe is the title. Look up Susan Aberth. Hers, it's a fantastic. She has this beautiful understanding of her as an artist, her artwork. It's wonderful. And if you wanted something that was a little broader, so in terms of like talking about all of these, so if you want Leonora Remedios, talking about Dorothea Tanning, I think is covered in there, Kay Sage, Whitney Chadwick's book, which is The Women Artists in Surrealism, wonderful. And all of these will have reproductions of the artwork, but also, an analysis in terms of, what the imagery is, what they were going through in their lives at the time, art historically. There's such beautiful reading too. They're just two scholars who just convey things so beautifully. And then we actually recently, our gallery published one a year and a half ago called The Story of the Last Egg too. So we have a book as well. And that was focused more on, there was a play that she actually wrote. She was actually,
Oh, interesting.
she wrote two novels, I believe.
Wow.
Just got reissued called The Hearing Trumpet. And she did plays as well, a couple of plays as well. So ours was focused on an exhibition that we had that was based on a play that she'd had, The Story of the Last Egg.
Now,
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, were the plays actually produced or
the
were they just written?
No, I believe one of them was produced down in Mexico during her lifetime, and I think that was it Penelope? And the story of the last egg, I'm not sure. It was prior to when I joined the gallery, but I'm not sure if they performed that one. But yeah, and then again the hearing trumpet and then down below is her memoir actually of her time in the mental asylum, which the film touches upon, which was such an impactful, tremendously impactful event in her life. And sort of I haven't read the memoir. I'm sure it's not an easy read, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but supposedly it's quite powerful.
It sounds like you may be in dialogue at least periodically with her sons. Do you have a relationship? Can you talk about a little bit about how they share about their mother and her work? They seem so proud of her in the film.
Oh my gosh, I can only say what I take from the film. Wendy knows them, and
Mhm.
so I do not as much, but they just watching that film, you could just tell their relationship was so natural, and that she cared
Mhm.
so deeply, and that they appreciated her as their mother, but also her legacy, her body of work that she created. And
Yeah.
it's lovely to see the honor and the respect that they have. It's that was very heartwarming actually to hear them speak about her.
Do you
Yeah.
have any idea if either one of them is an artist in their own right?
Oh, I believe that Gabrielle, I think he writes poetry for one of our gallery catalogs. He had written sort of like these spoken words to go with each of the paintings.
Oh, I love that. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. And so I want to say that but I'm not sure if they're visual artists. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like she wasn't just a visual artist. I mean, the film really portrays her visual art and talks about her visual art, but it sounds like she was a true artist, really, in the way she lived, in the way she cooked, in the way she communicated, in written and visual arts. It sounds like she had it all, especially if she did plays. All performing arts too, all of it covered, which is really interesting.
Exactly. Very diverse oeuvre. Yes, works on paper. These masks that she created for one of the plays, things like that. Yeah,
Wow.
I know. Yeah,
Do you
amazing.
have do you have a favorite painting that you work with or have worked with that's come through the gallery? Or work on paper or favorite work?
Oh gosh, I
I
would say
know, would you have a favorite child? I know it's that kind of question,
no.
but
But I have to say, no, one of the ones in the movie, in the film, I was so excited to see it because it actually is one of my favorite. And we had it in one of our shows. This one, I could show you.
I love that they're visual aids. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful piece.
So it's wonderful. And so Wendy placed it in the collection of New York MoMA, and so it's
Oh, wow.
there now. Hopefully they're open up again. But it is extraordinary. I was so happy to see it was one of the focuses of the beautiful documentary.
That's wonderful. Now,
It's
what size would that piece be?
okay. So this one was about 23 by 27.
Oh, okay. So, not that big.
Oh, it's not that big, but it is when
Beautiful.
you see them in person, it's such a different, even when we're publishing catalogs, in person, there's almost this glow. It's beautiful. I don't know how it's like a Renaissance, like the light she was able to paint within her compositions. It's extraordinary. And the details and things too. They're just, we've had this painting for ages. This one called La Haka, her symbol, the horse, and ages we've had it. And just last year, one of my coworkers goes, "There's a face." It was like we had not seen this little human face.
Oh
And
my gosh.
I know it's quite amazing. So it's like you are constantly discovering things, and it's almost like you barely see a brushstroke. It's like things appeared or formed rather than being painted. So but yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces. I love that with the Minotaur sitting there at the table.
Well, you have great taste. It was featured in the film,
Oh,
so
you're so
I do want to encourage. I don't see any other questions, but I do. Oh, I see a question. I will check that. Um, what are her pieces sell for today? What are some price points for her piece?
Oh, sure. So, let's see. Works. Let's see. Print. There are prints actually that were done during her life, and you can get those for under $10,000. Drawings and things like that will range. I would say ones that we've had have ranged from about 50,000 or 75,000 up to 95,000. You probably find them for a little less than that. Paintings that we have start at about 450,000, go up a little over 3 million, just depending on the piece and the time period and things like that. Her auction record right now, I think the highest she sold at auction is 2.4 million, which is still
Very nice. Yeah.
still very conservative compared
Yeah.
to, where some of the others, Magritte has gone, or Salvador Dali, but still, strong and getting stronger, I would say. Yeah.
And it's a female artist fetching that amount too. I mean, there is a difference in the canon of art history, by gender. But I hate to have to say it, but it is true. So to see female artists from that time who aren't necessarily producing right now go up and up in the prices they're fetching is nice to see at the auction houses.
It is absolutely. Yes.
We had another question, and that is, do you know if there are any exhibitions of her work coming up? I know it's a little bit of a tough time right now to know what's going to be open or not, but are there any planned in the foreseeable future? And can we come when your gallery opens up, not by appointment? Is it something we could come and see within the gallery, or are you normally by appointment?
Oh, you're so kind to ask. No, the exhibitions will start. Let's see, there are so many coming up involving Leonora. It's fantastic. So let's see, they will start at the end of this year, I believe. So the ones that are coming up, and I would encourage all of you, please, if you follow us on Instagram, we post there when things are going to be starting. It's so hard to keep the date straight, but I believe the end of this year is when we begin what. So she's going to be in Surrealism and Magic, and that will be at the Guggenheim Collection in Venice. And then she will be a show, 2022, 2023 will be a show at the Metropolitan Museum, which travels to the Tate, and it's called Surrealism Beyond Borders. And it's
Lovely.
huge surrealism show. It should be wonderful, but she'll be represented in that. But then also, I know international travel, hopefully by then though, it'll ease up. In 2022, 2023, the first one woman exhibition of her work in mainland Europe. So you'll have one, it'll be in Denmark, and then it'll be in Spain as well too.
Oh, wonderful.
That's very exciting. Yes, so that'll be wonderful. And then we're working on another, securing loans for another as well. And I'm trying to think, I wish I had more domestically here. Well, hopefully you can go to New York to the Met. Try to think of more.
I have high hopes that international travel will be open
know.
by then.
Ready.
Especially because I have tickets for it long before then. So
Yes.
I have hope that we'll get there.
Yes. So those are all coming up in the sort of end of 2021 and then 2022, 2023.
Excellent. It's nice to see her work really being shown very regularly. Has it been shown that regularly in the past, say, decade or so, or is it gaining more attention?
Definitely gaining more attention. Definitely. This has been one of the busiest, I would say, in terms of trying to help with loans to all of these shows. But again, since 2012, it's been slowly building. So right before this, there was a show called Fantastic Women, another group, female surrealism show, which sounds so funny to use that term. It's so funny because, Wendy and I, we both sort of feel the same way, and that we're like, female surrealists, women surrealists, right?
Right, just surrealist.
Leonora did the term, so did Dorothea Tanning, right? But at the same time, so at the same time, it's sort of like, okay, but these are the focus of these shows is what's bringing them to greater attention too, and it sort of lends to a cohesive curatorial theme. But yeah, so before that was the Fantastic Women exhibition. And then, before that was her show in Mexico City that went to Monterey. So I'd say it's been building, but this has been the busiest yet, which is nice. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
More people should get to see it in person because it's even better in person.
It looks just amazing. And like I said, I have not seen it in person. So I would love to, I thank the audience member for asking that question, because there's always incentive to do a little trip around art. I'm all for that. So, we've been about a half hour, 35 minutes. I want to encourage any more questions, but I also wanted to see if there are any stories or information that you think that I've missed that you'd like to share with the group.
Oh my gosh, I don't think so. I was so taken by the movie itself too, and just to hear, it's so great to hear her own words and hear her. Wendy always talks about her sense of humor, and I think that comes across beautifully in there. She was, as Wendy says, she was a stinker. So,
she was very smart.
She was
could just see that in everything and feel that in her work even.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you just, yeah, it was a beautiful way to convey her. So thank you for letting me be a part of it and to view it. I think it was excellently done.
It was definitely a treat, and it's always nice for me to, I mean, there's so many artists out there I have not discovered, but when I get to see a new documentary and discover an artist and really get to delve into their work, and then get to do a wonderful conversation with an expert in her artwork is just an extra treat. So for those of you who've done this with me before, it's been a couple years, but I usually end my Q&A. Oops, nope, 3 questions, so we're not going to get there yet.
Okay.
We'll do a speed round. No, I just was watching a webinar. Someone did a good speed round the other day. Can you still view the movie? Yes, you can still use the link that was given to you. I'm stumbling because I believe the answer is yes. If for some reason it isn't, someone else please hop on, more official than me, and correct me. And how much longer will the documentary be available online? This viewer, hello Susan, has some friends she'd like to see it. And then the last question we have right now is, can you comment on whether her surrealist expression was affected by her episode of mental illness?
Yeah, so interesting. I was actually, I mean, the experience itself absolutely had a lasting impact on her. I mean, how could it not?
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I was reading another scholar say, though, at the time, I mean, obviously she was having what was described as a breakdown, but then another scholar said, at the time, looking back on it now with the hindsight, would we have considered it to be a mental illness? How would we have categorized it? In looking, what she went through. And that I don't know. I'm not sure. Definitely the time. I don't know if it was, sort of situation specific, which it sounded like it. It sounded like it was the time that she was going through, and everything sort of culminated in that perfect storm, and resulted in that one painting that's in the movie Down Below was actually done while she was there in the what they call
interesting.
Yeah. And so, which sounds just like a horrific experience. So, and I think that definitely left her, made an impression on, extreme impression on her. But yeah, it was interesting too. And the surrealists had this fascination with sort of, people who were considered to suffer from mental illness. And, they sort of felt like they were people that were in touch with this sort of part of the mind that was unlocked and free from the consciousness. And so I think Breton actually did, Andre Breton, who was the leader of Surrealism, he did ask Leonora about that time there, that experience there, because he was so interested in that, But I also read somewhere where she said, they couldn't understand, they've never been locked up in this situation like I have, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So at the time, it definitely did come out in her work, and right thereafter, when she went through New York, you see it in the paintings, you do see it. But then I think that sort of subsided, and then the work took on, and her life took on a new path.
Yeah. I also find it interesting that if I recall correctly from the film, her family's the one who made the decision to put her there, and being estranged from her family, and her family not understanding the life, truly understanding the life she had been living. If it had been a situation, would that have been the choice of the family, or would they have taken her back in and cared for her? I think there's so much more at play than just her actual state of being, but it's what surrounded her that probably influenced quite heavily what happened next to her.
Very much, so, absolutely. That's good way to think of it as
just
well.
Just my impression was that the family seemed a little uncomfortable that she was an unmarried woman, scandalous at that age, and in that time. And so that was a good way to say, oh, well, she did these crazy things, she must need some help, so.
Right, exactly, yes.
It's an interesting conversation to have.
Very
we'll
much.
Never know.
Right.
So as I always end all the Q&As, I want to give you a chance to promote anything or anything you want the audience to know about the gallery and I'm interested if there's anything interesting about the San Francisco art scene that you find that's interesting to the group, because we will be able to travel within California. We can. Please feel free to share.
Oh, it's so nice. I would say, if you're interested in Leonora Carrington, our artist that we just added to our roster, to our modern roster, we're publishing the first English language monograph on her to come out. Actually, it's arriving now, and her name is Alice Rahone. So she was actually started as a poet, and then she was married to Wolfgang Paulin, the Surrealist artist, and they actually went, again, like Carrington during World War II, they went into exile into Mexico, and she made her home there, and really, grew and established her life there. And it very much became her adopted home, just like Carrington. She was French. And the work is just a beautiful body of work. And so we're coming out with that book. It'll be available through us, but also it's on our website now if you even want to click through and just experience her work. And it's just, I encourage it just because it is such a beautiful body of work that she created. And a new artist too. I mean, we're always, for a while, the big name was Frida Kahlo, and everybody of course knew that, and everyone should know that name. And and now we get to fill it in with, Carrington and Varro and Rahone and Tanning. And so, yeah, so we invite you to explore her and to learn about her. As sort of a nice rediscovery happening right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, Melanie, for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This has been really fun for me. I hope I'm sure the audience has enjoyed listening to you talk on Leonora Carrington very much.
So you're lovely, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then I want to thank the audience, and I always personally want to thank UCR for their partnership with the city through all these. I think this is the 12th season. And this is the last film of this season. So thank you to the audience for attending this unique version of the art documentary series that I think is actually able to reach some people that it may not have otherwise. So I'm glad you were able to carry on with it. And I do see one more quick Q&A. I'm going to check it out and see if it's a quick answer. Oh, great talk. Enjoyed it very, very much. So we'll take that one any day. Thank you.
Sweet.
And thank you all. And this is good night, I think. So
okay. Oh, Deborah, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for having.
Thank you. Have a nice night, everyone.
Bye.